Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We're continuing our read-through of Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings, Book 1 of the Stormlight Archive. And we are up to Chapter 18, entitled High Prince of War. There's a couple different scenes in this chapter. The first begins with Adolin tracking down the rumor and some details surrounding King Elhokar's torn saddle. Was it torn? Was it cut? He goes to some leather workers and he's asking questions, which is all very normal and natural. What's not normal and natural is that he has a date with him. Yanala is her name. And Adolin, as we've heard in previous chapters, he's very handsome. He's very dashing. Of course, he's the classic prince in armor, not only just armor. He has a shard blade, shard plate. He is a future high prince. I mean, he is the dream of the court, we could put him that way. And the issue is that he's really bad with relationships. So yeah, he brings a girl on this essentially business meeting, and she's not very pleased. She makes several comments. However, Adolin has a job to do, and he says, look, this is romantic. We're taking a walk. What's more romantic than that? Of course, she has different ideas about what their time together should be. And so Adolin's off doing his thing. We sort of cut scene over to Dalinar, where he is discussing with one of his scribes, Teshev. She is one of his most trusted scribes, and they're talking through finances. They're talking through, just what the kingdom looks like here on the Shattered Plains, of course, back in Elhokar. And they are trying to manage two essentially capitals here in the Shattered Plains with the Vengeance Pact, and then there is still a kingdom that is running. That the king, the Highprinces, they are not there. They're all at the Shattered Plains. And Dalinar would like to keep it that way. Part of the conversation is that as the Shattered Plains become more and more established, people are less dependent on the king and his ability with the different fabrials to essentially produce material for them. Teshev pretty much asks him, she goes, High Prince Dalinar, why do we not want these high princes to plant farms, to begin to harvest wood in the forests? And essentially the goal is, no, we need to support Elhokar, and allowing us to get a little too established would mean that they don't need him. So they're having these types of conversations. And as they're sort of leaving there and moving on, they're going to see the king. Renarin and Dalinar have kind of a nice moment. Dalinar is talking to Renarin and sort of realizing himself, though Renarin is 20 years old, Dalinar still views him as a boy, right? And Renarin is more of an analytical son. He's definitely not Adolin. However, Dalinar has a nice moment with him where he promises him that next time on one of these chasm runs, because the enemy has shard blades, right? The Parshendi, and if you get into the midst of a chasm run and you're trying to get a gem heart, it is not uncommon. It's not entirely uncommon to find a Parshendi that is a shard blade wielder. Dalinar makes him a promise. The next one we get, I'm going to give it to you. And we're going to begin your training with the sword again. And Renarin is excited, right? And Dalinar appreciates it because he goes, you know what? I know what it's like to be a second son. I was not the oldest brother. Gavilar was. You're not the oldest brother. Adolin is. And I want to support you and make you feel like I do love you, right? So a really sweet moment. The next scene, essentially we cut right there. Adolin is still on the date, and they're still not anything closer to a romantic situation. He is now in a temple. He is now in the temple on the Shattered Plains talking to one of the priests of Vornism. His name is Kadash, and he is a former soldier. He has a big old cut on his head, and Adolin thinks that's odd. Well, at this point, Yanala absolutely is done with this date. She snaps at him, "You brought me to a temple?" And he says, "Temples are romantic, right?" She says, "First a stinky leather's workshop, now a temple. I'd assume we would walk someplace at least faintly romantic." He says, "Religion's romantic, right? Eternal love and all that stuff." No. She storms off, and it leaves Adolin talk with Kadash. And they get to talking about Dalinar. They get to talking about the rumors about his fits during the high storms. And Kadash is being careful because talking about his high prince, he has to be careful, number one. And number two, he's talking to his own son. He wants to strike a perfect balance between being truthful, being honest, but also being respectful. And so they don't really get very specifics, but Adolin takes away for the fact that there was an old historical story of people that claimed to be receiving visions from the Almighty. And they led the people astray. Essentially, they were lying. And Kadash says, part of Vornism is that we don't need priests anymore. Everyone makes goals, and you earn the Almighty's favor based off of how you achieve your goals. Everyone can rise, everyone can accomplish, and that's how Vornism works. So Adolin pushes him, "Are you saying that my father here is lying?" "No, I'm not saying that." Well, if he's claiming to receive visions, and Kadash essentially says, "You know what? Your father needs you in this moment, Adolin. And when you've addressed to him and when you've seen that through, I want you to come back because you've set some goals that you want to try to achieve and you haven't met any goals recently." He says, "You're right. I'll be back and we will continue to work on these goals." Okay? Then pretty much the last scene of the chapter, Dalinar and Renarin are before Elhokar, and the king has Dalinar has an idea for the king. Says, "Elhokar, do you remember when your father essentially and Dalinar made a decision that we were going to specialize the Highprinces? Each High Prince was going to have a job, and they were in charge of it for the whole kingdom. One may be the High Prince of merchants, and they get to set the merchant prices, the merchant rules, and they would, with their soldiers, enforce that." And Elhokar says, "Yes, I remember that, but none of the High Princes want that anymore." And Dalinar says, "Yeah, it's because they've gotten essentially fat and lazy." He says, "I think we should bring that back. And I think you should make me the High Prince of War." And that's the chapter title, right? He says, "And with that, I'm going to unite them, and we are actually going to change our battle strategy to defeat the Parshendi. This whole siege process isn't working anymore." And Elhokar says, "Uncle, I don't think you have it in you. But I'll tell you what, if you can begin to prove to me from the other High Princes that they'd be okay with the specialization of their labor, I'll consider making you High Prince of War." Dalinar takes it as a win. They salute, they nod, they head on back to mount their horses. They're pretty much marching back to Kholin war camp when Renarin kind of shakes his father. And he says, "Father," he points over to the east, and an unexpected high storm has blown up. And again, these aren't just normal storms. There is a massive storm wall, like a hurricane, comes blowing in with rock and debris, and it will destroy anything that's not storm-proof. And that's scary, but you'll remember what's even more troubling for Dalinar is that when a high storm hits, these visions begin. So they race off as fast as they can. They actually make it to the Kholin war camp. However, they're not able to get back to Dalinar's mansion or castle. They have to find last-minute shelter in one of the soldiers' barracks. They rush in. The storm hits. And the last portion of the chapter reads, "Dalinar tried to ignore the uncomfortable eyes around him." I mean, the High Prince himself is amongst these soldiers, these servants, hiding for protection. Wind howled outside. Perhaps nothing would happen this time. Perhaps this time the storm hit, and it, meaning the visions, began. My goodness gracious, what's going to happen? People are going to see his fits. They're going to see his visions, not themselves, but him react to them. Where are they going to go from here? Will he be able to get the other High Princes to buy in? We'll see. Time will tell. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video.